Chapter 2, Crimes Against Security. Section 1, Abandonment of Helpless Persons and Exploitation of Minors. 1. Abandonment of persons in danger and abandonment of one's victim. Article 275-2. Abandoning minor. Article 276. 3. Abandonment of minor by person entrusted with his custody. Indifference of parents. Article 277-4. Exploitation of minors. Article 278. Article 275. Abandonment or persons in danger and abandonment of one's own victim. Acts punishable under Article 275. 1. Failing to give assistance to any person offender finds in an uninhabited place wounded or in danger of dying when he can render such assistance without detriment to himself, unless such omission shall constitute a more serious offense. Elements: A place is not inhabited. B accused found there a person wounded or in danger of dying. C accused can render assistance without detriment to himself. D he fails to render assistance. 2. Failing to help or render assistance to another whom the offender has accidentally wounded or injured. 3. Failing to deliver a child under 7 years of age whom the offender has found abandoned to the authorities or to his family, or by failing to take him to a safe place. Note: if person intentionally wounded another in an uninhabited place, Paragraph 1 of Article 275 is not applicable. Note: Paragraph 2 of Article 275 applies only when someone is accidentally injured by the accused. Article 276. Abandoning a minor. Elements: 1. Offender has custody of a child. 2. Child is under 7 years of age. 3. He abandons such child. 4. He has no intent to kill the child when the latter is abandoned. Note: when there is intent to kill, this article does not apply. Note: intent to kill cannot be presumed from the death of the child. Note: a permanent, conscious, and deliberate abandonment is required in this article. Note: circumstances qualifying the offense. 1. Death of a minor resulted from abandonment. 2. Life of minor was in danger because of abandonment. Note: parents guilty of abandoning their children shall be deprived of parental authority. Article 277. Abandonment of minor by person entrusted with his custody. Indifference of parents. Acts punished under Article 277. 1. Delivering a minor to a public institution or other persons without the consent of the one who entrusted such minor to the care of the offender or, in the absence of that one, without the consent of the proper authorities. 2. Neglecting his children by not giving them the education which their station in life requires and financial condition permits. Elements of abandonment of minor by one charged with the rearing or education of said minor. 1. Offender has charge of the rearing or education of a minor. 2. He delivers said minor to a public institution or persons. 3. Person who entrusted such child has not consented to such act, or if the one entrusted such child to the offender is absent, the proper authorities have not consented to it. Elements of indifference of parents. 1. Offender is a parent. 2. He neglects his children by not giving them education. 3. His station in life requires such education and his financial condition permits it. Note: obligation to educate children terminates if mother and children refuse without good reason to live with the accused. Note: failure to give education must be due to deliberate desire to evade such obligation. Article 278. Exploitation of minors. Acts punished under Article 278. 1. Causing any boy or girl under 16 years of age to perform any dangerous feat of balancing, physical strength, or contortion, the offender being any person. 2. Employing children under 16 who are not the children or descendants of the offender in exhibitions of acrobat, gymnast, rope walker, diver, or wild animal tamer, the offender being an acrobat, etc., or a circus manager or person engaged in a similar calling. 3. Employing any descendant under 12 years of age in exhibitions of acrobat, gymnast, rope walker, diver, or wild animal tamer, the offender being engaged in any of the said calling. 4. Delivering a child under 16 years of age gratuitously to any acrobat, gymnast, rope walker, diver, wild animal tamer or circus manager, or person engaged in a similar calling, or to any habitual vagrant or beggar, the offender being an ascendant, guardian, teacher or person entrusted in any capacity with the care of such child. 5. Inducing any child under 16 years of age to abandon the home of its ascendants, guardians, curators or teachers to follow any acrobat, gymnast, rope walker, diver, wild animal tamer or circus manager, or person engaged in a similar calling, or to accompany any habitual vagrant or beggar, the offender being any person. Note: circumstance qualifying the offense. Delivery of the child is made in consideration of any price, compensation or promise. The penalty is higher. Note: offender shall be deprived of parental authority or guardianship if convicted. Note: exploitation of the minor must be of such a nature as to endanger his life or society. Article 279. Additional penalties for other offenses. Section 2. Trespass to dwelling. Article 280. Qualified trespass to dwelling. Elements of trespass to dwelling. 1. Offender is a private person. 2. He enters the dwelling of another. 3. Such entrance is against the latter's will. Note: the protection and preservation of one's privacy is intended to be punished in this article. Note: circumstance qualifying the offense. If offense is committed by means of violence or intimidation, the penalty is higher. Note: dwelling is any building or structure exclusively used for rest and comfort. Note: entrance into the dwelling must be against the will of the owner or occupant. Note: in general, all members of a household must be presumed to have authority to extend an invitation to enter the house. Note: prohibition is implied in entrance through window. Note: prohibition must be in existence prior to or at the time of entrance. Trespass by means of violence. Examples: 1. Pushing the door violently and maltreating occupants after entering. 2. Cutting a ribbon or string with which the door latch of a closed room was fastened. 3. Wounding by means of a bolo the owner of the house immediately upon entrance. Trespass by means of intimidation. Examples: 1. Firing a revolver in the air by the person attempting to force their way into a house. 2. Flourishing of a bolo against inmates of the house upon gaining entrance. Note: violence or intimidation may take place immediately after the entrance. Note: prohibition is not necessary when violence or intimidation is employed by the offender. Note: if there is no overt act of the crime intended to be committed, the crime is only trespass to dwelling. When article is not applicable. 1. If entrance is to prevent some serious harm to himself, the occupants, or a third person. 2. If purpose is to render some service to humanity or justice. 3. If place where entrance is made is a cafe, tavern, inn, and other public houses. Article 281. Other forms of trespass. Elements: 1. Offender enters the closed premises or the fenced estate of another. 2. Entrance is made while either of them is uninhabited. 3. The prohibition to enter be manifest. 4. Trespasser has not secured the permission of the owner or the caretaker thereof. Note: premises signifies distinct and definite locality. Note: entering a warehouse may be trespass under this article. Section 3. Threats and coercions. Article 282. Grave threats. Acts punishable. 1. Threatening another with the infliction upon his person, honor or property or that of his family of any wrong amounting to a crime and demanding money or imposing any other condition, even though unlawful, and the offender attained his purpose. 2. Making such threat without the offender attaining his purpose. 3. Threatening another with the infliction upon his person, honor or property or that of his family any wrong amounting to a crime, the threat not being subject to a condition. Note: threat must but inflict a wrong amounting to a crime upon the person, honor, or property of the offended part or that of his family. Elements of grave threats where offender attained his purpose. 1. Offender threatens another person with the infliction upon the latter's person, honor, or property, or upon that of the latter's family, of any wrong. 2. Such wrong amounts to a crime. 3. There is a demand for money or that any other condition is imposed, even though not unlawful. 4. Offender attains his purpose. Note: if offender attained his purpose, the penalty is 1 degree lower of the penalty for the crime threatened to be committed shall be imposed. Note: circumstance qualifying the offense. Threat is made in writing or through a middleman. The penalty to be imposed in its maximum period. Elements of grave threats not subject to a condition. 1. Offender threatens another person with the infliction upon the latter's person, honor, or property, or upon that of the latter's family, of any wrong. 2. Such wrong amounts to a crime. 3. Threat is not subject to a condition. Note: third form of grave threats must be serious and deliberate. Note: essence of the crime of threats is intimidation. Note: the crime of grave threats is consummated as soon as the threats come to the knowledge of the person threatened. Note: threats made in connection with the commission of other crimes are absorbed by the latter. Article 283. Light threats. Elements. 1. Offender makes a threat to commit a wrong. 2. The wrong does not constitute a crime. 3. There is a demand for money or that other condition is imposed, even though not unlawful. 4. Offender has attained his purpose or that he has not attained his purpose. Note: light threats are committed in the same manner as grave threats, except that the act threatened to be committed should not be a crime. Article 284. Bond for good behavior. Cases: a person may be required to give bail not to molest another. 1. When he threatens another under circumstances mentioned in Article 282. 2. When he threatens another under circumstances mentioned in Article 283. Note: giving of bail is an additional penalty. Article 285. Other light threats. Acts punished as other light threats. 1. Threatening another with a weapon, or by drawing such weapon in a quarrel, unless it be in lawful self-defense. 2. Orally threatening another, in the heat of anger, with some harm constituting a crime, without persisting in the idea involved in his threat. 3. Orally threatening to do another any harm constituting a felony. Note: there is no demand for money or that there is no condition imposed when offender threatens another with a weapon. Note: threats which ordinarily are grave threats, if made in the heat of anger, may be other light threats. Article 286. Grave coercions. 2 ways of committing grave coercions. 1. Preventing another, by means of violence, threats or intimidation, from doing something not prohibited by law. 2. Compelling another, by means of violence, threats, or intimidation, to do something against his will. whether it be right or wrong. Elements of grave coercions. 1. A person is prevented by another from doing something not prohibited by law, or compelled to do something against his or her will, be it right or wrong. 2. The prevention or compulsion is effected by violence, either by material force or such a display of it as would produce intimidation and, consequently, control over the will of the offended party. 3. The person who restrains the will and liberty of another has no right to do so. Note: in grave coercion, the act of preventing by force must be made at the time the offended party was doing or about to do the act to be prevented. If the act was already done when the violence was exerted, the crime is unjust vexation. Note: compelling another to do something includes the offender's act of doing it himself while subjecting another to his will. Note: when the complainant is in actual possession of a thing, even if he has no right to that possession, compelling him by means of violence to give up the possession, even by the owner himself, is grave coercion. Note: the crime is not grave coercion when the violence is employed to seize anything belonging to the debtor of the offender. Note: not intimidation by display of force if arms are not used. Note: the force or violence must be immediate, actual or imminent. Note: the owner of a thing has no right to prevent interference with it when interference is necessary to avert greater damage. Note: there is no grave coercion when accused acts in good faith in the performance of his duty. Note: the main purpose of penalizing coercion and unjust vexation is to enforce the principle that no person may take the law into his hands, and that the government is one of law, not of men. Note: coercion is consummated even if the offended party did not accede to the purpose of the coercion. Note: coercion is distinguished from illegal detention when there is no clear deprivation of liberty by the purpose of the offender. Note: prison may or shall be imposed when 1. Coercion is committed in violation of the exercise of the right of suffrage. 2. The coercion is committed to compel another to perform any religious act. 3. The coercion is committed to prevent another from performing any religious act. Article 287. Light coercions. Elements. 1. Offender must be a creditor. 2. He seizes anything belonging to his debtor. 3. The seizure of the thing be accomplished by means of violence or a display of material force producing intimidation. 4. The purpose of the offender is to apply the same to the payment of the debt. Note: offender must be a creditor of the offended party. Note: taking possession of the thing belonging to the debtor, through deceit and misrepresentation, for the purpose of applying the same to the payment of the debt, is unjust vexation under the second paragraph of Article 287. Note: actual physical violence need not be employed. It is sufficient that the attitude of the offender in seizing the property of his debtor is notoriously menacing as to amount to a grave intimidation. Note: there is no violence or intimidation in unjust vexation. Note: when the act of the accused has no connection with his previous acts of violence, it is only unjust vexation. Article 288. Other similar coercions. Acts punished as other similar coercions. 1. Forcing or compelling, directly or indirectly, or knowingly permitting the forcing or compelling of the laborer or employee of the offender to purchase merchandise or commodities of any kind from him. 2. Paying the wages due his laborer or employee by means of tokens or objects other than the legal tender currency of the Philippines, unless expressly requested by such laborer or employee. Elements of number 1. 1. Offender is any person, agent or officer of any association or corporation. 2. He or such firm or corporation has employed laborers or employees. 3. He forces or compels, directly or indirectly, or knowingly permits to be forced or compelled, any of his or its laborers or employees to purchase merchandise or commodities of any kind from him or from said firm or corporation. Elements of number 2. 1. Offender pays the wages to a laborer or employee employed by him by means of tokens or objects. 2. Those tokens or objects are other than the legal tender currency of the Philippines. 3. Such employee or laborer does not expressly request that he be paid by means of tokens or objects. Article 289. Formation, maintenance, and prohibition of combination of capital or labor through violence or threats. Elements. 1. Offender employs violence or threats in such a degree as to compel or force the laborers or employers in the free and legal exercise of their industry or work. 2. The purpose is to organize, maintain or prevent coalitions of capital or labor, strike of laborers or lockout of employers. Note: the act should not be a more serious offense. Note: the act should not constitute a more serious offense in accordance with the provisions of this code. Note: if death or some serious physical injuries are caused in an effort to curtail the exercise of the rights of the laborers and employers, the act should be punished in accordance with the other provisions of the code. Note: peaceful picketing is not prohibited. Note: employing the violence or making threat by picketers may make them liable for coercion. Note: preventing employee from joining any registered labor organization is punished under the Labor Code, not under the RPC.